Okay.
Looks good.
All right. Have you visited the YouTube site
Yes.
for the Dhamma talks? I think now there's about 65 of them there.
Yeah. I have not seen everything. I did watch a couple of them before talking to you for the first time to get a sense of what might be waiting for me. So,
Go ahead. I say continue.
okay. No, I just watched a couple of them, although most of the people it wasn't their first session, so it was kind of an ongoing talk between the student and you, and I hadn't seen the previous ones, so it was helpful to some extent, but um, yeah, not as good as asking my own questions directly, of course.
Exactly. Which is the better way to go. Um, and you're right. Uh, there were some recordings done a couple of years ago. The older ones would be ones that are more basic, to where the more recent ones, because there was a long period of more than a year where there were no recordings done at all. But then Skype made it available so that it was easy. All that necessary was to click. Um, Various pieces of software were experimented uh, on both sides, and no one was able to get much of anything. I think, in fact, some of the recordings that are there, the old ones, were done with someone using a cell phone, just letting it record what he heard off of uh, the speakers on his laptop. But now that we have this ability to do Skype, uh, actually um, the way that it works is really excellent, because the recording itself is done by the Skype servers. When it's done on a local computer, the recording quality and the writing to the drive and all of that kind of stuff generally is enough to break almost every machine that every student has tried. So it's not a
Yeah.
really good system. But this system seems to be working. However, you are right, and that is that now what's happening is many of the students are old. They've already covered the Dhamma, and so we're talking about individual questions that they have that are really, really advanced for some people. And that's hard for me to keep track of, because the way that I look at the Dhamma is that it's just one thing. There's just one thing to talk about, one class to take, etc. And yet I also recognize that it took something on the order of 40 years for that to consolidate. It's almost like that it takes 40 years for the water to evaporate so that you've actually got a pan of salt finally, to where most people's have a mind that's polluted with all kinds of stuff in it.
Well, I hope the YouTube people can get some benefit from my beginner type questions.
Actually, you're a newer student, and that will do some value. But in general, um, when in on almost every tape, I give the basics, because
Yeah.
everybody has questions about the basics, and so we keep covering the basics over and over and over again. And the way to manage the basics is exactly the same way, or actually the advanced stuff is by managing it exactly the same way. That in fact, what advancement is there's twofold. One is that the student begins to wake up to the present moment more and more and more often. And as he does, he sees more and more and more things. By doing that, he's able to draw more and more dots, which would be the wisdom part, and putting things together, which is exactly what we're talking about, is being able to put the Dhamma together. All right. Now, there's something else that happens along that way, and that is that the more the student puts together the way things are, including the way that it's taught, the Buddha Dhamma, a certain amount of zeal or intensity starts to build up, a thirst for, as it were, the end of suffering. Let's do this thing, all right? And a kind of a gung-ho quality comes. And then, in fact, when that gung-ho quality comes, where the student is really fully dedicated to the Dhamma and is working all the time to try to be here now as often as he can, that's what we call the stage of Sotapanna. And really, the progression of Sotapanna through the fruit is actually the building up of the dedication. Okay, and so eventually I will go through those things in detail to you, but I wanted to point that out, is that the path has these two components, and that is the waking up of the process and then the dedication to more waking up, and that they run and circle around each other, that one is the cause and then becomes the effect, and so they begin to build each other in a really excellent way, and that's what gives then what they call the fruit of Sotapanna. So the fruit of the Sotapanna is the dedication to the path, and also because of that, the eradication of the doubt about, am I finally on the right path or not? The answer is yes. This is it. I've finally gotten that part. Okay, and so that eradication of doubt is an enormous relief. But on top of that, you could say is that, okay, so what I've been able to do is to throw out the doubt. But what I've had to do is replace that with dedication or determination or the willingness to make that major change, which is that major change basically is the change from living our lives instinctually into living our lives intentionally, with intention, which is another way of saying that we now have the skills developed so that we can get down to two things that are extraordinarily important to be dealt with. And those two things are actually part of the second noble truth, and that is sensual desire or greed, wanting things we don't have, etc., like that, and also ill will. Now, when those things are most visible is when there's not much ignorance. So the second noble truth is that the ill will and the greed or the sensual desire is really suffering because it's done ignorantly. We don't see that stuff is going on. We don't recognize what our own instinctual motivations are. But when we realize how the mind works, we begin to see all these two things that really get us going are actually based upon the buildup of feelings. The very, very small feeling of I like it, and the very, very small feeling of I don't like it. Now that third kind of feeling, which is neither liking nor disliking, which for the normal, ordinary, unskilled person who has no understanding of the Dhamma, that feeling, when it rises up in confusion, in fear, in trepidation, in doubt, in uncertainty, and kind of a freeze situation. I've actually seen politicians recently, when confronted with things, he just freezes, he loses it. And because he loses it, he probably will lose the election because he just lost it. Why? Because he was confronted, and instead of recognizing what he was feeling and being able to answer the question, he went into a state of freeze. It was right there on national television for everybody to see. And yet we all do that on a regular basis, that we lose it because we don't know what to do. And so we go into a state of confusion. I've also seen animal photos or videos of mostly a tiger or a leopard chasing down prey.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, when that prey is caught, that's when it goes into the death throes or the struggle. But the part of being caught is when the animal kind of gives up. All right, so that ultimately giving up, I've been caught, is a deep instinct that all animals have because of the kind of worlds that this place has come. And that stuff still happens. So it's built into our genes to go through these things of freezing, flight or fright mechanisms, or wanting protection. In fact, almost all sensual desire has to do with the grabbing hold of weapons or trying to be powerful, because power is part of self-preservation mechanism. All right, but once someone comes to the state of Sotapanna, where they really know what the path is, they know Dhamma, they realize what's going on, that element of ignorance is now greatly eliminated. And in the process, that means that the student can begin to actually see not only the sensual desire, but the feeling of I like it, therefore I want it, underneath that. In fact, part of the process of becoming Sotapanna is being able to see this stuff happening, that we recognize that when we get angry, this because underlying that was the feeling of I don't like something and I'm trying to get rid of it. But instead of bringing wisdom at that point of contact, when you're saying, okay, I don't like it, I can see that I don't like it, but when we're not mindful at that point, when we don't see what's going on at that point, then it will naturally deteriorate or build up into anger that many meditation students will find themselves angry and wonder how they got that way, to where the ordinary person who has no skill in meditation, they won't even know that they're angry. You can actually say, you look pretty angry. No, I'm not angry. They're not even capable of noticing it.
Yeah. I have a funny story about that. A colleague of mine was on the phone yesterday with some guy who was really angry. And he was so angry, he was actually screaming at her. And I was sitting like a couple of feet away from her, and I could hear him screaming through the telephone. And then she said, like, you don't have to scream at me. I can hear you just fine if you talk regularly. And he was like, this is my normal voice. This is how I always talk. I'm not screaming at you. So that perfectly illustrates the point, I think.
Yes, exactly. It perfectly illustrates the point. But being meditators, we begin to recognize, oh, I don't know what to do about that. Well, obviously, and clear the example would be if that you recognize how somehow that you've gotten your state into a state of anger, how small or large it is, the very first thing that we want to do is to shut up. Stop talking. So if that had been a Dhamma dude on the phone and she said, you don't have to shout at me, it would have been dead silence for a while. so that he would allow himself to cool back down. Take a deep breath, be here now, etc., like that. Why? Because we recognize now we've got exactly that same skill that we started to practice in the very first step. Was when the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, start again. We come back to the breath, we take conscious deep breaths, we be here now. That's exactly what we can say is, and when the mind wanders away in anger, and you can see it there, then you do exactly this same thing. When you find yourself in greed or wanting something, then you do exactly this same thing. But now we're doing it with the wisdom that we have developed through the path of knowing that this is the path of the Dhamma.
Can I just comment on something? About the zeal that you were talking about. I feel like this ties in very well with what we talked about last time, which was the way I would phrase it, but not the way you would phrase it, is bringing meditation into daily life. So not only practicing formally, but also, I guess, being mindful, being aware, just all the time, basically. And one phrase that's been stuck in my head for a while now, I guess at least a couple of weeks, has been this phrase of practice like your head is on fire. this kind of, last time I was somewhat complaining that I sometimes get the feeling of, oh, this is too hard, I don't want to practice, I don't want to be aware, I just want to stick my head in the sand and be ignorant on purpose because it seems painful and hard. And I think I'm getting some aspects of that zeal or ardor, I think it's also sometimes called, of really applying myself and trying to get the most out of it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, so one of the major qualities of the beginning of this zeal, almost the seed of the zeal, comes from the success. All right? That's an important quality, is in fact the very first step of the Noble Path, is when the student comes to know that no matter how much the mind is obstructed with hindrances, that we can clean that stuff out and come back to this present moment. That even if we've been dwelling on something that we don't like for hours, we can still, when we realize, hey, thinking about that stuff is not beneficial. We recognize that we're stuck in wrong view. And so we can say, never mind, I'm going to throw that stuff out of the mind and I'm going to come back to this present moment and be here now and enjoy this moment. That's moment of success. That's the building of the Iddhiyapada, the basis of power. Now, the power itself is manifest as the feelings of satisfaction, success, prosperity, satisfaction, contentment. That in fact, satisfaction, success, and security are only on their road to contentment. There's actually things that need to be done to get down to the level of contentment, but it has a lot to do with satisfaction. That when satisfaction becomes really strong, okay, well, the satisfaction is then based in success. And so we start watching for the little successes. Every time we see the mind wandering away, we say, I caught you. Every time we recognize that the mind has gone off into a topic that is not beneficial for me to think about, I congratulate myself for being able to come out of those thoughts and come and be here now and start thinking about what's going on right now rather than thinking about the past that I don't like and think that I've got to fix. That's one of the biggest mistakes that humans make, is we think that the past is not finished yet, we can fix it.
Yeah, actually, one moment of success that I had that really stands out to me is I was sitting, and it occurred to me, I had some mind wandering, I came back to the breath, and then it occurred to me, or I got this immediate sense of it's really nice to just be with the breath and to just sit there without actually having to do anything. To just, it was really effortless in the sense that I didn't have to focus on the breath. It was just there and I could feel it. And it didn't last long, maybe a couple of seconds, and then it kind of faded away. But it was this feeling of I don't have to focus, I don't have to strain or put effort or strive, and it was really, really pleasant.
Exactly. All right. That's what we're looking for. That is what we call the little nibbana moment. You're using the word ease. It was easy. The breath was there. I didn't have to work on it, that it was just there. Okay. These are the words that fit for you. But it's exactly what we're talking about. And one of the ways of getting back into that state is by recalling or recollecting not the time or the place or the event, but the sensations and the feelings of satisfaction. That you remember how that feel was so that you can recreate it for yourself. Not from a memory base, not from the past, but from something that's stored there, because you have easy moments. In fact, everybody has these easy moments. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa said that people would die. They would spontaneously combust if they didn't have these cooling off periods from time to time. You just take a deep breath and just sigh. And almost every time that happens is after a natural success that people will have, a little success. And that little success can be nothing more than being able to get home. You've been working all day, and now you've driven home, and you sit down in your easy chair, and that first minute of just sitting down, and the guy will sigh, at least I made it home. I made it through the day. Okay, so those things are completely ignorant to that man. Or he doesn't know about them. He's not paying attention to them. Now what we're doing is we're starting to pay attention to that, because we're going to connect it so that we can begin to be in that state as often as we can think of it. Because it's really pleasant. As you said, it's very, very nice to just be here in this present moment. And in that regard, you can see why I say that the teaching is actually quite small. There's not very much to it. It's all just one thing. But what that means is that we've got to distill out everything that's not Dhamma, so that we can always stay back to this very basic thing of let's be easy, not tight. Let's be unified in the mind rather than scatterbrained, which also has the quality of honesty as opposed to the quality of deceit. And in that, it also has the quality of purity rather than dirtiness. In a very, very real way, the teaching of the Buddha is a moral path and nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. It's only morality 100% of the time. This is a way of looking at it. So the Christians have got nothing on morality. In fact, the Buddhist monks go over the moon with a whole bunch of little rules in the direction of mental purity. But when the mind is done, instead of, you see, one of the things that most people make mistakes about is thinking that purity or morality has to come or has to do with rule keeping. That little children are given the rules. Even the Thai children are given precepts, given a set of rules to keep. Now, we can get by with, the nobles can get by with, saying that it's okay to give children a set of rules. That's because they don't have the mental capability to understand the results of their actions. But after a child gets older and older, in fact, that's one of the things that we should do, is to start to teach the children to become aware of the results of your actions more and more and more, so that we can begin to see. So that one kind of knowledge is always on the outside. But morality is not on the outside. It's not meeting social conventions. In fact, one can say that someone who is not making social conventions, who is breaking social rules, robbing banks, getting drunk, whatever like that, can be thought of as wrong view. The people who have the ability to abide by society, to fit in, even in fitting into a system that is based on social class climbing, they still find ways of fitting into that, to where it's easier for the Thais to learn to fit in, because here it's much more of a social network than a hierarchy. And everyone, there's no way of, literally, there's no social climbing to do, because there's no society other than just distance, or the society differences other than distance. And it's kind of strange like that, because with the Thai people, the idea is for each person to find their own happiness within the situation that they find themselves. And because of that, you'll have a fairly happy society, to where in the West, people are taught that your happiness depends upon how much you can climb socially out of the situation you're in into something better. But it's still all based upon outside world, in the sense of society, social climbing. In fact, the society of the West holds very high regard to greed, as if it were something good. Gordon Gekko making the phrase, greed is good. And we're finding out that actually, no, that's a lie. They're told actually by the very wealthy. The very wealthy want other people to become wealthy so that they can steal their money easily. They don't want to have to steal from poor people, because that's a lot of hard work. They want somebody else to steal from them.
Yeah. Also, materialism is becoming more and more of an obvious problem to me.
Excellent. You can see that it's based in instinct. It's based in the feeling of liking that's operated upon ignorantly, and that's one of the qualities of a Dhamma dude. Over time, you will become less and less and less materialistic.
Is that something that just unfolds on its own, or is it something we should put some effort into? Okay, I'm feeling some sense of wanting for some material object, and then just consciously withdrawing or opposing that.
No. The answer is still back to wisdom. The answer is to see that the feeling is just a feeling of liking, and that the wisdom will kick in right then and there, saying, yes, but you're not going to be any happier by buying that item. Okay, do not place any magic on that item, because that item has no effect upon you. Only you in your own mind have the ability to affect you. So in reality, the idea of winning the lottery is almost always superior to actually winning the lottery. Look
Yeah.
how many people buy lottery tickets having hope in their heart that they're going to be having a better life someday. And that, I'm saying, is ordinary right view. Actually winning that lottery is going to throw them into 100% total wrong view. Why? Because now they've got to protect it. Now they become the money. Now they got to protect themselves from the tax man and the neighbors and relatives you never knew you had, as well as 10,000 salesmen trying to sell you things that you desperately need now that you have enough money and you have their interest. Okay, so winning the lottery, in fact, the statistics are big lotteries have gone to the point of saying, okay, we're not going to give you all the money now. We're going to dole it out a little bit every year for 20 years. The reason for that was because giving one person a huge lottery all at one time destroys their life. They quit their job, they spend all their money, they lose it all, and 3 years later they wind up destitute. It happens
Yeah.
over and over and over and over again. In that regard, the idea of winning the lottery is actually better than winning the lottery. But having the idea that the lottery to be won is this present moment. Ah, this present moment is the lottery. Winning this present moment, that's the way to go. All right, so that the quality will happen is through this zeal, this building, that's based upon success of practice and the knowledge and vision that is getting deeper and deeper and deeper, that this is the right way to go. We begin to really start paying attention to what's going on in this present moment, and that we start doing that in seclusion. We need to be in seclusion. We need to have that practice time, and we need to do that possibly for years, or in fact right on. I don't think that I would be able to go for an 8 hour a day job. Couldn't do it. But the point here is that we want to start by having this seclusion time and liking it, so that we can use this time for development of the mind, for the skill development and the enjoyment of the skills as they're developing and as they come into fruition. So the skill, and so it's all based upon the enjoyment of this present moment. And the more we recognize and realize that, then the more we become zealots about doing that. And so we begin to make little deals with ourselves, like certain events or situations. We're not going to think about them at all. We're going to chase that elephant out of our room. All right. And eventually we do that one after another till the idea is that I'm not going to think about anything that happened in the past. I'm just going to stay in this present moment. I will use the past for information, but it will be information to be used in this moment. It's not just reminiscing and recollecting about the past, or thinking about a house I used to live in, or a car that I used to own, or a friend I used to have, or a place that I used to live, or a job that I used to have. All of those kind of used to kind of things, as soon as we recognize them, we throw that stuff out of the mind. Say, I don't need that. Why? Because if I reminisce in there, I'm going to find something that I don't like about that memory. In fact, memories are like that. All memory is like that. Even data storage decays. That's one of the major problems of data centers, is how can we store data for the long term? Here in this small 160 terabyte data center that's here, things are triply backed up. One backup is actually the RAID itself. And then the second backup is an offline backup. Because I know these drives, I haven't seen a drive yet that lasted 10 years. And I go way, way back. The biggest hard drive that I ever worked on when I was a customer engineer with IBM was literally bigger than a refrigerator.
Okay.
100 megabytes.
That must have been, what, back in the 80s maybe?
No, back in the 60s.
Okay.
And tape drives and disk drives, this is the kind of stuff. And the big problem was being able to write something on a tape drive and then being able to get that tape drive to read that data back again. That was hard work. The same thing was going on in the audio industry at the time of how can we get reliable, good music sound. They never were able to until they got digital.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow or another, the audiophiles had come to learn to love the sound of not music or silence, but the sound of the noise of the equipment that was used to record and manufacture the sound. They loved it so much they still buy that equipment, even though the actual sound is much better when it's digital right from the beginning, if it's got enough, if the sampling rate is high enough. Mm-hmm. All right. So in the case, if that's true about big business, big industry, and the very best that humanity has to offer about the preservation of data, what do you think happens about the preservation of data on the inside of a mind that has no backups?
Oh, yeah.
It's all stored naturally.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of research about how false memories come about, how false witness testimony comes about, how people actually not intentionally lie, but simply completely misremember stuff or manufacture stories that never happened, even in like very, very serious cases, like court cases, legal trials, that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So I'm very, very skeptical of my own recollection of past events.
That's exactly the way to do it. In fact, the word to start learning to use for that past is not sure. I'm not sure I remember it exactly right or not. Especially when two different people who will have a conversation about something that happened months ago, they're not going to agree at all. It's not possible for them to agree. First off, they didn't agree when it happened. Mm. But over time, it deteriorates, going further and further and further apart. And knowing this, knowing that our own memory is unreliable, that gives us an extra incentive to stay out of the past, thinking that it has to be repaired or fixed or longed after or pined over. I used to pine over a motorcycle that I actually gave away willingly. I walked away from it, but I wouldn't relinquish it in the mind. It was the kind of motorcycle that people will pine over if they know what it was. It was a BMW R69S. It was the last of the best before they started doing sport motorcycles. This was the very last German Gestapo kind of motorcycle.
That's an old-timer by now, right?
Oh, yeah. It would be worth 100 times what it costs new.
Well,
and every time I think about it, I suffer. Therefore, I don't think about it often.
Yeah. So actually, I had an experience of this whole thing. You talk about throwing unhelpful stuff out of the mind, chasing the elephant out. I had an experience where I talked to someone and I got really angry. I got pissed off. I got very, very impatient. I felt, and then it was really powerful. So I noticed that it was a very unpleasant state of mind, and to be honest, I wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible. So I tried coming back to the present moment of the never mind, start again type. But I just noticed that the thoughts had a lot of power, or not only thoughts, also emotions, and going back to it like mentally, like recalling stuff and being caught in it. So that was happening every couple of seconds, probably, just coming back for like very brief period of time and then just getting sucked right back in powerfully. And so one thing that actually helped me, and I don't know if this is a Dhamma type thing or just a psychological type thing, I actually just wrote down what happened. Like I just made like a half page to page account of what happened, and then it somehow lost a lot of its power and a lot of its, like, it didn't suck me right back in. I could say, okay, that's it. I'm not gonna think about it anymore after I write it down. And then
That was the winner right there.
yeah.
Not the actual writing it down, but to dispose of it after you write it down. In fact, that was going to be the question that I asked, is what happened to that piece of paper?
I have it in a drawer, but I haven't looked at it
Really?
since.
You should take it out into the backyard and with great happy ceremony burn it. Say, I'm rid of you now.
Yeah, but it was really pleasant to notice that I had more control, in the sense that my mind wouldn't immediately be drawn back to it after that.
Exactly so. That's the intention, to have the intention to, I ain't going to mess with that anymore. I'm going to throw that out. All right. Now, one of the other things that I wanted to make mention to you is that it's not the actual thoughts that are so painful, but that the thoughts are associated with the kind of memory that is actually an emotional memory,
Mm-hmm.
that we remember things emotionally, and that in one of the suttas, there is a place where this is referred to as Sita Sankara or Chitta Sankara. But the way that it's, and this is really brilliant, the way that that is translated into the Thai language is jai, or heart, rather than mind, where in the English they always translate it as mental formations,
Mm-hmm.
to where in fact the way that it's actually dealt with and seen and experienced inside the monk's own mind is that this is not mental formations, these are emotional formations, these are emotional memories, that in fact the mental formations that we have are in this the Sankara, are in the sutras referred to as verbal or language formations,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that we think with language. But it's not the thinking of the past with language that's so painful. It's the emotional
Mm-hmm.
memories that we have with that thing that came up. And in fact, it was stored emotionally and linguistically together. But it was stored at all because of the emotion. That if there's no emotional baggage there, we almost always just forget about things completely.
Yeah.
Very few humans remember everything. Nobody does.
Yeah.
And it can be a disaster for someone if they cannot distinguish what's important and what's not important.
Yeah.
Well, that important tag is based on an emotional piece of baggage or a memory that we throw in there. But basically what happens, though, is that that memory is stored as baggage to be carried around, to be opened up, to suffer over yet again, to close it back as a bag and store it back and have it carried around for yet another time. We can open that bag and look at that R69S and feel really bad about it, and then close that bag again and go think about something else. And when we recognize that we're doing that, we can put a stop to it by staying out of the past, because we recognize that it's full of this emotional baggage that got there in the first place because we weren't watching what we were doing. So the first thing is to stay out of the past, and the second one is to start watching what's going on now so that things don't get to the point of feeling big enough that it needs to be recorded. To let things be easy, to come back to an easy state. And the easy part is the one that's the most easy to forget because it doesn't mean anything at all. It's all empty and it's all easy. So that requires this mindfulness that eventually builds up as right effort. And that effort builds up then to the point of right zeal. One will be willing to take the effort to be on guard so that we can come out of wrong view into right view, making sure that the right view that we have is a supramundane right view, or a more correct right view than one that's based upon emotion or based upon the feelings like most memories are. And so we will take on a more correct right view. In that way, right mindfulness, right effort, and right view run and circle around each other. And that right view then gives us the capability of adding right intention or right attitude. And that right attitude is also as part of the effort. In fact, the effort and the attitude are very similar together. They're very close. Right effort is instantaneous, and right attitude is an overall view of right effort. So that we're always willing to go out of wrong view into right view. Always willing to make that transition. Why? Because right view is easy, painless, sophisticated, comfortable, easy, cool. And I use the word cool in the sense of nibbana, because that's what the word nibbana means. It means to cool off. And so when we're able to keep going back to that state over and over and over again, we feel successful. We feel like a lion. We feel like I've got this nailed now, that I can keep coming back to this state. I don't have to worry about the past anymore. All right, that's the state of Sotapan. But the Sotapan has not finished off with the feelings that lead to anger or materialism or things like that. All he's got going for him now is knowledge. Or in this state, wisdom. But you can imagine. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask some questions, but finish your sentence, please.
Okay. What I was about to say is that these three aspects of the second noble truth fit in not only at an instantaneous level or right down to the way that the mind is working right now, but as we start to have wisdom and start to modify little bits and pieces of the way that the mind operates, we come to understand that now the real work that's left is this issue of feelings, the feelings of liking and the feelings of not liking, because we've already begun to master the feeling of confusion because of the eradication of doubt. Later we will have to revisit it. But right now the main thing that we have to work on is to be there for how we feel. And so this is the next step. Way that we do that is again through the body. And so how we start working with feelings is that we need to find a way so that you're going to be able to wake up throughout the day on a regular basis so that you can start to pay attention to the things that are worth paying attention to. And that the things that are worth paying attention to can be thought of in reference to the Satipatthana and in reference to the fourth one, the mental objects are going to be mental objects that are worth paying attention to, and not mental objects that are unworthy of paying attention to, in the sense of the hindrances of the past or the future, but rather we're going to be paying attention to things that are worthy paying attention to, which are always happening right now. So in that regard, the application of the Four Noble Truths, to be able to see suffering, to be able to see the mind works and the way that it works, this is what's worthy of the kind of thoughts that we're going to have now. That when random thoughts just occur, the random thoughts that occur are going to be random thoughts about Dhamma, about this present moment. They're not going to be random thoughts about what happened 5 years ago. And if they do, then we're going to throw that stuff out and come and be in this present moment and have our thoughts associated with this present moment and the body, the feelings, the mind and the mind states, and wholesome mental objects. All right, all of that stuff can be done all at one time, or let us say within a minute. So whenever the mind wanders away into ordinary regular life, and we remember that, oh, I'm going to take a little Dhamana moment right now, then we take a breath, we become aware of the body as it's breathing, we take a look at the mind in the way that it's a successful mind, that it took a moment of sati, that we congratulate ourselves for being in the present moment, that we like it, that we can throw all of the other crap out of the mind and put something in the mind that's wholesome. All right. Now, as a lingering thing, what we want to do then is start closely paying attention to what the body is doing as this easy breath is still there. And you might, in fact, go back and start doing your regular business. For instance, going and getting a cup of coffee. But now we're going to get a cup of coffee in a completely new way, because we're going to be mindful of the hands. The way that we're going to be mindful of the hands, in fact, the hands are a major part of the body. We want to pay a close attention to the hands. In fact, Buddhism does they call them mudras. The word mu is hand. Okay, so mudra is hand postures, hand positions, etc., like that, to start to becoming aware of the hands. And in various Buddha statues, you'll see all kinds of hand poses that are used. All right, but the important point that we're making is that all of this hand movement and posing and all of that is important because the guys were paying attention to their hands in the first place. Get my point?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So paying attention to the hands in the sense of grasping, picking up, clinging. Let me get something here. I'll just use this. I used to have a bunch of little Buddha statues, but they're all in the other room on a thing. So imagine that this is what we're going to pick up. The way to go about doing it is as you're approaching it, you open the hands, and then you grasp. Notice the first thing that you touch, and then the grasping, and then the holding and the withdrawing. Okay? So the approach, the touch, the grasp, and the withdrawing are things to start to notice about the hands. When you're in sitting meditation, notice your hand postures. There's various ones. One is to hold the hands this way and touch the thumbs. All right? Which thumb is touching which, and which one are you paying attention to? That's a little bit hard. Even more difficult is when you're doing this one. This is also another one. But instead of paying attention to the fingers raised in the air, the real issue is to pay attention to what the index finger and the thumb are doing as they're touching each other. How close can they get as you begin to feel the sensation of the other one before they even touch? because they have that ability. A lot of people don't know that, but when you start watching and start recognizing, yes, I can feel the finger, the thumb can feel the finger, and the finger can feel the thumb before they actually touch. The same thing then is with the thumbs. So this is something that we can begin to experiment with, to really get to know the fingers literally from the inside out. Because humans have become so visually oriented, we almost always think of the hands in the sense of looking at them from the outside with the eyes rather than experiencing the hands from the inside, including noticing what you do with the hands when you scratch the nose.
Yeah. Actually, every time we talk about that, I get really conscious of all the little, like, fidgeting micro moves that I do. Like there's this tiny unpleasant thing in my face, and the hand kind of goes up, and then midway from going up, I notice, oh, I'm doing that. But it only ever like, at this point, it only ever happens to me while actually talking to you. Like, when I go back to my day, go about my business, I don't have yet that kind of, I guess, mindfulness.
Well, that's
in,
exactly
in
what it is. This is the sati, the waking up. Oh, I'm going to do
yeah.
this. All right. So one of the ways of doing that is by having a key or a clue or a reminder of something. And it seems that modern day guys, the best way to do it is by getting a timer for your cell phone and letting it go off maybe once an hour. And then after you get used to doing that for a few weeks, then you can start to play with the time about how often you do it. Now, one of the things that every student say is that after I start doing this once an hour, I can begin to do it more often without the cell phone. I begin to remember to do this stuff throughout the day. And that's the building of mindfulness. All right. Now, in the temple, and before you had these kind of things, there were other things that would be available for a monk to use. An example would be a particular bird in the neighborhood making its bird call. Or, and the one that's the most interesting and curious is that many abbots, and Achan Po was really good about this, that people would say at the front of the temple, "Where's Achan Po?" Nobody knows where Achan Po is. But I'll tell you where he is. He's out standing outside of the kuti of one of the beginner monks, waiting for how long that monk figures out that Achan Po is standing outside his kuti.
Why is that?
Well, there is a way of waking up. We have to become awake. So that young monk, once he steps outside and sees Achan Po there, he says, "Wait a minute, how long has Achan Po been here? How long asleep have I been?" And so tomorrow when Achan Po comes, he's going to be able to see Achan Po because he's going to be alert and awake for Achan Po coming by. Okay, so these are the natural old techniques that have been used and continue to be used throughout Asia, but Westerners never get in touch with this kind of stuff. So it should be introduced, but there are more modern ways, and we can use the cell phone. You can imagine every time that cell phone goes off, think about that old master standing outside your kuti. Oh, he's there. The cell phone goes off, and there he is. Time to be alert, time to be awake. Okay, so once we start paying close attention to the body and close attention to what our hands are doing and bringing that up over and over and over again, to be here now, to take a deep breath, to be successful, to be happy, to be secure. Let us say that you do that during a normal day. That's like 14, 15 times a day. Okay, so now you're beginning to get a little bit of a habit going. Every day, 15 times a day, you're going to be in Nibbana. 15 times a day, you're going to start watching what your hands are doing. 15 times a day, you're going to be highly alert. So what happens with that is that there is something else, and that is the feelings are controlled by the same area of the brain that your motor movements are. And that in fact, most of the movements that we have with our hands are based upon feelings, to where the sensation was in the body, it traveled through the spinal cord up to the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain did not like that feeling, and he told the arm to go scratch it.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the itching and scratching and movement that we have with the body is a very excellent way of learning how we feel.
Mm.
To get in touch with that very deep level of feeling. Why? Because there was that sensation. There it was.
Do you mean
And I
feeling
didn't
in the
like it.
sense of? Do you mean feeling in the sense of positive, negative, or neutral? So in the
Any kind.
Buddhist
Okay,
kind of
but
feeling.
but the ones that were most likely to do something about ignorantly would be an itch
Mm-hmm.
that you will scratch, or rubbing, or will move, for instance, right now under my right leg, my foot on the floor the way that it is a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that pressure, the natural tendency of the mind will be to move the leg an inch, to stretch it out. Okay, so what we're doing by slowing all of this down is we're getting a chance to see that most of the body's movements are based upon feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, that's the secret. So by paying close attention on a regular basis, often waking up, and then as you go out throughout the day, you pay more and more attention to what your hands are doing. That you consciously start reaching, grasping, noting, etc., like that. So just as you mentioned about that, when I tell you about it while we're talking on Skype, that you're mindful of it, right? That's
Yeah.
exactly the same thing as Achan Po coming and standing in front of your kuti. It's exactly the same thing. All right, so we need to use this little alarm clock or some app that goes off once an hour, uh, so that it will be your own recognition that, okay, now is the time to take a little Nibbana moment. Only a minute, only one moment out of 60 is all this takes.
Yeah. I have to say that we talked about some of this last time, I think on Sunday, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I've been actually trying, or I've actually been doing this already for a while, and it's it's working pretty well, actually, in the sense that without any kind of reminder or app or timer or anything, um, my mind is just um, reminding me sometimes. It snaps me out of it. Like there's
Exactly.
this waking up moment where from one moment to the next it just completely changes from being stuck in something to remember what I need to do, take a deep breath. And I also like to consciously relax my shoulders and
Mm-hmm.
face and stuff to just kind of relieve tension. And I would say that it's been happening, it's hard to say, but probably at least 10 times a day without me having to do anything. So I'm actually really enjoying that part of my mind that is like running in the background and saying, okay, come back to the present moment just for now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, it's a really excellent practice to come be here now. That in fact, this is such an important quality of the practice of the Dhamma, that this is what the Buddha called himself,
mhm.
the Tathagata, which has the word tatatha built into it, which is often translated as thusness or suchness. But when they're translated like that, they're only giving an indication of what we're talking about, not actually defining it. But when we define it to be here now, be present in this moment, to be here with your body, that's what they mean by the word this is it, or thusness, or thisness. This is it. Ta-da!
Yeah.
And so that's what the Buddha teaches, to be here now, to be present with the present moment. That way we can see what's happening. We can see feelings as they arise. And pretty soon you'll begin to notice them, so that you don't wind up all the way into anger. Or you don't wind up with your credit card out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is really good. This is more elaboration on what I was already doing, and I really like the thing that I noticed just now in these last couple of minutes is I'm constantly doing like these tiny micro fidgeting, relieving some very small discontentment or feeling of pressure and itch or pain. So in formal meditation, we of course don't want to move. So you just notice an itch and then try to sit with it and not fidget around constantly. But so it kind of reminds me of that, to where you just notice that there's an itch and then possibly just let it be there or move intentionally and scratch it, instead of just having your reptilian brain do it unconsciously. So
exactly. So
the practice opportunities are 24/7 with that, because I'm constantly doing it.
Exactly. Always remember to add the joy, that component of I'm the boss here. Okay, I do not have to scratch you. So you bring that joy component in. Aha, I caught you. Reptilian brain, you are now my servant. You are no longer the boss.
Yeah, that's good.
Because the reptilian brain is what keeps us in victim's position. If we become the boss of the victim, then we become the winner, the champion. And so this is a quality or an aspect of the Buddhism that very few people understand, and that is that the Buddha was a lion. And so part of the quality of becoming Buddha-like is to become strong, to become fit, to become mentally capable of handling everything, and we know that we can. That's part of the unification of mind. A unified mind is actually extraordinarily strong compared to the weak-mindedness of one who has a mind that's scattered. Okay, so part of the unification of mind then is just to have the frontal cortex incorporated into all of the automatic activities that the anterior cortex was doing while the actual pilot was asleep. Because this actually takes effort. When you start thinking about your breath, the frontal cortex actually lights up in the MRIs, which means there's energy. This is going to take work. That's where the zeal comes from, is I'm willing to put in that work. I'm willing to put in that effort, because the option is to leave things in a really messy state. And so now you're beginning also to see how this practice is integrated. The practice is integrated because the intention of the practice is to become integrated, to become a unit, to become a whole human being. In a way, this is ultimately growing up. This is how a human being actually grows to be a full adult. This means that he's completely in control of his life and not subject to frustrations. And these kind of people are rare. Most
I was
politicians don't have this.
I was just gonna say, by that definition, I probably don't know any grown-ups personally.
I do. I've met quite a few.
Yeah.
And every time it was a surprise. But I will also say this, most of the people that I have met like that have all been monks.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they were in training for doing just this. That's another mistake that most Westerners make. They think that this practice is so difficult that the successful, to be able to practice successfully, is very rare and very, very unusual, maybe once a century or even less often, or there haven't been any enlightened beings for hundreds of years, so I've heard. And I laugh all the way to the tree when I hear that.
So this actually goes back to a question I had a couple of minutes ago that I wrote down that I think fits in here. You talked for a bit about the stream enterer, and the question that came up for me was, so in my mind, this is exactly what you just said, like some very esoteric, faraway goal that's to where it seems almost mythical or impossible to achieve. And the way you're talking about it, it seems like it's this like not too far away intermediate step that's just the first step into like the really fun stuff or the really like advanced practice maybe or something like that. So maybe you could talk about that for a bit.
Well, actually, it has to do, if it's called advanced, it would be a settling in. It would be moving from success into contentment.
Mm.
And I'll give it that way. Later we will talk about the higher fetters and how that fits in. But the important thing is to recognize that when I use the word higher, I'm only using in the sense of that they're all totally mental, to where all the stuff that we've been working on so far has been what is called rupa asava, which means that whatever is there can be physically manifest. An example of that is when someone is angry, they may not know they're angry, but everybody else does. You can see it right there, that fetter in operation. Okay, when greed is there, that can be seen.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in the society. You can see it in purchasing. You can see it in business and advertisements and all of this kind of stuff. So it can be seen. But really, what can be seen is wrong action based in ignorance. All right? Wars, rumors of wars, rumors of rumors, all of that. All right? So all of that is physical, but the 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 other fetters, the higher ones, are all mental.
Okay.
And that they give, when they give rise to reality, it's manifest in the lower fetters.
Mm.
And so the higher fetters are only mental, and we'll talk about them later. But I'll give you the list of five. There is Rupa Raga, Arupa Raga, um, Mana, which is conceit, Ajiva, which is ignorance, and the big dude is, I forget the Pali word now, is restlessness. Well, that
Mm.
restlessness, which is worth an entire talk on, is the final completion of fear. fear of the unknown, fear of the empty, fear of everything, so that we become completely fearless in the sense of being a lion, completely fearless. Okay, so that fear eventually, but it manifests itself as uneasiness, agitation, um, anxiety, stress. It's a really, really big thing, but it's often missed because it's so subtle.
Okay.
Okay, and then there's a final layer of ignorance. Most of the ignorance of the mind of the second noble truth is the ignorance that is dispelled by knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path of the Buddha. All right, that's the state of Sotapan, and we'll talk about that, about what's worthy of attention, what's not worthy of attention, which leads rise to the understanding of what this is all about. So we'll talk about this and get into more detail of it. Right now, I'm trying to give you a kind of an overall idea of what's happening, and then I'll give you a more specific idea of the process. But in that, the number one thing, the way that it all gets started, is with the feeling of success that you can, in fact, clean the mind out and come to this place of be here now. That's the very first step of the noble journey. And then the final part of the journey is when you are completely at ease, knowing that you can do that. Completely at ease, knowing that you've got that skill. That it doesn't matter what bothers me, I can throw that out. Because I'm the boss at this lion's house. No suffering allowed. Out, down spot. All right. But we do that with happiness and joy and with ease because we know that we're completely successful at it. So that would be those final ports that have to do with fear that we have mostly already dealt with by having knowledge and vision of what is the path and beginning to walk the path. We begin to understand and have actually knowledge and vision of walking the path also. But not any one of these things are the whole deal. Every one of them, it goes from this step to this step to this step to that step in order. And that these steps are well known, well mapped out in the suttas, and everyone who progresses along the noble path will fit on to that path. And a lot of the path of the Sotapan is that building of the zeal so that we become more and more dedicated. And the zeal shows itself not in intensity, but in intentionality. Let me make that distinction. The zeal is not intense. It's easygoing. That's what we're going for. When we use the word zeal, it sounds like that we're doing something really intense, working very hard, strapping on an extra group of bombs. But really, the zeal has more to do with the intention of coming back and having that intention more and more, the intention of being here now, just based on the success of doing it and liking it and really enjoying that quality.
This actually brings me to another question I've been having for a long time. So for several weeks, if not months. So I've never been to a retreat, and I've been thinking that it would be beneficial to go to a retreat. However, I've in the past had some, let's say, mental health problems with depression and stuff like that. And I was wondering if you had any advice on those two things in combination. So basically, I've read that, or I've from people I've talked to, obviously a retreat is not like a wellness vacation, so it can actually be quite intense, and also depending on like what kind of retreat you do, I have the or I'm worried that I might not 100% be able to kind of stick with it, or I'm worried about like difficult stuff coming up and not being able to deal with it. Do you have any advice on that?
Only about a book full. All right. The first thing to start talking about a retreat is to look at the word retreat itself. What is the word before it started being used in Buddhist context of Vipassana retreats or Dhamma retreats? Look at the word itself. What does it mean? It means to leave the battlefield.
Mm.
So when you look at it like that, of getting out, I want out of here. This is a dangerous place. So the retreat has to do then of getting away from it all, getting away from society. This is exactly what the Buddha is talking about when he's talking about the simile of the log and the bog.
Mm-hmm.
Have I told you that story?
Yeah, about having it dry out before you can make a fire.
Right. So the retreat then is the drying out process. So there has been various levels of success in the West, but for some reason or another, psychologists and statistics and all of that get involved with it, and they also do a bit of guru worship, thinking that the way that it used to be taught to Asians is exactly the right way to teach it to the Westerners, and therefore we want to weed out any Westerners who are not capable of following the wrong instructions successfully.
Okay.
You hear where I'm going with this? Okay. So I've got a very good friend. His name is Thad. He's in charge of the maintenance and logistics of the Big Goenka Center in California.
Yeah.
So he's really in it. He and I have been friends for quite a number of years, and he's actually been here to watch Soan Mok and done retreats here. Okay, so he's that kind of close friend. And he and I have discussed, because he got access to all of the computer stuff that they keep at the Goenka Center. And one of the things that they will do at every retreat is they'll have the students fill out a long, long form and sign it to make sure that the Goenka people do not have any legal obligations based upon people not following the practice correctly. Another thing that I have learned about, and by the way, I was a Goenka student also. I wouldn't have been able to be such a friend of Thad if I hadn't been there and done that. And I used to follow Goenka around from, let us say, 1980 to about 1983 was when I was around Goenka, way back in the early days when Abaya Gary was just getting started. Scott, excuse me, I gave you the wrong word. His name is Dhammagiri, which means the hill of the Dhamma, as opposed to Abaya Gary. Sorry about that. So Dhammagiri. So another thing that we know about Goenka students in the West is that it's normally a number of years, sometimes as many as 7 years between retreats. What that indicates is that the student went to the first retreat, didn't get out of it what he wanted, but now his life is back into such a miserable place that he's willing to give his first failure a second chance. The likelihood for that second retreat to work is very high, because once students start making one retreat after the other, then they get used to it. And that one of the things that Brenda here at Wat Soan Mok, because she speaks really excellent Thai and has been at Wat Soan Mok about 20 years, And so she's got a lot of friends, and she knows that the Thai people who come to Wat Suan Mok to do retreats are the same group of people. In fact, they've kind of got like a club or an organization that owns buses.
Mm-hmm.
And so while they're not in South Thailand doing the retreats here, they're at the Goenka Center in Northern Thailand doing retreats up there. And they have no problem with the Thai people going back and forth between Bhikkhu Buddhadasa retreats and the Goenka retreats. Though Westerners would see them being greatly different because the focus is different, and that the Western mind will see things differently. For instance, Goenka looks extremely Indian.
Yeah.
His retreats were set up originally for Indian. He spoke in Hindi. He actually learned to speak English to be able to do retreats in English. Because when he didn't speak very good English when I was with him in 1980, but by the time he died, which was only 3 years ago, his English was pretty good. But they still do those retreats by tape. Unfortunately, they've started to do that by tape with Achan Bhikkhu Buddhadasa at Wat Suan Mok. But they still have good retreats at Deepa Bhawan here with my friend Dhammarato, who's been a monk about 25 years, as well as Achan Po. And so things are still going along very well. But the Thai retreats are really good at Wat Suan Mok, but unfortunately the instruction is not very good there. So this is the problem that students have when they do retreats, is they don't understand the instructions correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they're given in a way that the students don't get it. I mean, Goenkaji would inside of a 10-day retreat, he might say the phrase 1,000 times, and that is never mind, start again. Never mind, start again. The never mind part is to recognize that the mind has wandered away. Never mind, come back and start again. Over and over and over again is what the students need to do. And yet, there's another aspect of those retreats that cause a lot of trouble for Westerners. And that is the retreat part, not the instruction and not the sitting. It's the everything else that they abandoned, all their material possessions. Okay, now even a monk's life does not, monks do not spend all of their time in retreat. And so the way the retreats are set up are not to give the students a flavor of what it's going to be like to be a monk. And yet a lot of people make that mistake, especially if the retreats are done at a wat or a monastery. They think that, oh, I'm just doing what everybody does. And in fact, oh no, you're only doing what the people in the retreat are doing. Everybody else is doing completely other things on their own. All right. So that's an important quality, to recognize that most of the problems that people have with depression would be if you locked them in solitary confinement in jail. They would go into a depression. That's exactly why they put people in solitary confinement, is to make them miserable as possible. That's why solitary confinement is the worst possible thing you can do. That's not torture. All right?
There's this there's this saying, people would prefer the company of rapists and murderers to being alone with their thoughts.
And yet the retreat is exactly that, to help you come to the point of being alone with your thoughts. And that a lot of students wind up treating the retreat as if they were in prison.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. I definitely don't want that. I would rather not go to a retreat than have that experience for 10 days, to be honest.
Okay, so by following proper instructions, you won't have that. Now, I know of students intentionally. In fact, I had one student who came to do the retreat, But he came the day before the retreat full of anxiety, and I could not get him out of that state of anxiety, so he went into the retreat loaded for bear.
Mm.
So he had to deal with that anxiety. If he had been able to deal with that anxiety before he went to the retreat, then he could have done the retreat a lot better. But in fact, he had an extra ton of anxiety. And the anxiety that he had was partly because of the family situation that had put him into that state of anxiety, because they didn't like him going to Thailand at all, never mind to do a Buddhist retreat. And so they've got their hair on fire, and he came with that anxiety. All right.
Mm.
So we have to make sure that you're in the proper mental state before the retreat starts. Okay. And the way to do that is by looking forward to the retreat as if it's going to be something delicious like candy. You're looking at it like it was broccoli.
Yeah. Yeah. Even, and that's putting it mild. I mean, it's not that I'm like, it's not that worry is the only thing that I have about it. It's also that I would really love to do it in a way because it would give me a really good opportunity to deepen my practice, to get some momentum going, to really maybe carry that into daily life. Yeah. So, and it's not that I hate meditating. Like, I usually, like these days after your instructions, I usually really enjoy it. So it's not that like sitting is torture to me, but it's there's just a sense of worry about, would I be able to actually do it in a very intense way? Like the Goenka retreats, like it's a 10-day retreat. I don't know how long exactly they sit per day, but I think it's like 12 hours maybe or something. It's a really long time, and that's a whole different animal compared to like sitting an hour per day or 45 minutes per day.
Yes, that's true. But the attitude would be the important point here, in the sense that the way that you're describing it, you even use the word intense.
Yeah.
All right. But you can look at it with the right attitude of being really easy. And possibly that has a lot to do with the rules. If you go to the retreat with the idea that you're here to get your mind cleaned out, then that will be what happens. If you go to the place to say, well, I'm going to get my mind cleaned out, but the only way that I can do that is by follow all the rules correctly. Now you're adding a layer of anxiety and intention on there, and intensity that is completely unnecessary. That's one of the problems of teaching Dhamma, is because we give them a set of rules, and those rules, in fact, the actual precepts that are given at Buddhist ceremonies, the precepts, by the way, are always they're the second thing. The first thing that's done is the triple gem, or taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Buddham, Saranam, Gacchami, and then they do the second and the third time, Dutiyampi, Tritiyampi, Duvammasama. Okay, and then they do the precepts. All of this was never done in the time of the Buddha. This is all stuff that has been developed out of suttas to be given to lay people, etc. So when they started to do the retreats were invented intentionally for lay people, not for monks. That the way that monks are taught are almost always on a one-by-one individual basis. You've got teachers, you spend your time with teacher, you go and you meditate, and you go and you read, you come back to your teacher. That's really not possible if you've got one teacher and 100 students in a retreat. So you've got a disadvantage. The second part is that if you're teaching all the same thing to all of the students, then you're expecting all of them to be at the same class level.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to say some things that are very valuable to some students. You're going to say exactly that same thing, and the other students are going to hear it, and it doesn't help them at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because the students don't have the ability to sit and listen in a way that is spoken to just to them.
Yeah.
That in fact the teacher doesn't even know them until they go and they start spending time with the teacher. So the first thing that students do is they arrive at the right time for the meditation retreat to start, and they start cold. They don't know what to do, and they expect that you're going to be told everything to do, to where in fact it's taken, what, 10, 12, 14 hours worth of time with you before you would feel comfortable that you would know what to do on the first minute of your retreat. So that's one of the ways of looking at it, is most of the students who freak out are freaking out because they don't know what to do. They freak out because they were freaked out when they went in. They were freaked out because they freaked out about all the rules they've got to keep and all of the structure and everything. And then on top of that, they freak out over the real freak out is that they don't have any of the tools or whatever to keep them from being freaked out. No books, no notepads, no pencils or paper or books to read or cell phones or whatever like that, and you're left with just your own mind, and that's enough to freak out most teenage girls. Because there's a jungle in there.
Yeah.
But you've already developed the skills that you need to do a retreat. And I don't even care whose retreat it is or what rules or whatever they give you, because, and I'll also go so far as to say you can follow their rules, just like the Goenka retreat says, that when you're in this retreat, we require and recommend that you follow the rules that we give you like this. And so I would say, yes, you would want to do that, but you've got an entire foundation underlying that, so that you've got a knowledge base, you've got a background, you've got more to do, or that a lot of the confusion that many students will have, you're not confused about that. You know what to do. Another one is the issue is that with the Asian ways of teaching, the students the students are actually not having a problem. Thai people don't have a problem generally with joy.
Yeah.
Westerners are the sad sacks. And so that the quality of the Buddha that is talking about that step 10 of gladdening the mind, of being successful, develop those powers, the power of success, the power of satisfaction, the power of security, the power of ease is the word that you use. To feel at ease, to feel cool, all right, and to keep coming back to that. And in that regard, that retreat's dead easy, because there's really nothing to do at all except sit there and enjoy yourself. And the only way you can do that is by staying out of the past, out of the future, and be here now.
Yeah.
And so you've already had experience at doing that, to where many students who they come to the meditation retreat, they're starting at absolute ground zero, and you're already a mile ahead of them. So in that regard, what's really going to be hard for you is what's going to be hard for them at that other end, and that is the retreat part of it, the fact that you are having to actually deal with your mind, because you don't have a laptop, you don't have YouTube, you don't have TV or books to look at or anything. There's only this present moment, but that allows you, by being out of the bog of society, to really drain that stuff out, to really get away from it all. Now, generally what happens at the beginning of the retreat is a lot of students will think about how they got into the retreat the first couple of days. At the end of the retreat, the students will figure out what they're going to do after the retreat, and so they've already wasted 4, 5, 6 days. And the only time they're actually getting anything done is in the middle of the retreat, and that's when they're dead miserable. Especially day 6, because now it's wearing on and on and on, and day 7 we begin to have a glimmer of hope, but day 6 is like, this is never going to end. Another 4 days after this. Ah!
Yeah, that's what I envision happening to me. Exactly that. This is like to where every minute feels like an hour, and it's just painful and miserable.
But the painful and the miserable part is what you're already in the habit of doing.
Oh.
And in that regard, by doing that, you're not practicing correctly. That's what every student does. They don't practice correctly. After a few days, they get really, really tired of it. And not only that, but something else magical happens. What magical happens is that over their time of doing this over and over again, see, the first day of the retreat, they'll be able to see the mind wandering away 4, 5, 6 times per hour. But by day 5 and 6, they're seeing the mind running away from the breath 300 or 400 times, maybe.
Yeah, I'm already there.
Okay, and they can see that wandering, and then that's when they get really disappointed because they think that their practice is going backwards instead of forwards.
Okay, yeah, I've had that experience already. I think that was last week. We talked about that exact point.
Mm-hmm. So that's another issue that the students will have to deal with, and that is that their mind is getting superior, it's getting skills, but the skills themselves are beginning to point out what work needs to be done, and it looks absolutely unbearable how much, I mean, oh my goodness, this mind is such a monkey mind. Instead of saying, wow, I'm beginning to really see how the mind is actually built. Wow, I'm beginning to actually figure out how this thing is working. Coming back, that change of attitude.
Yeah, I fell into that trap big time of being really disappointed at seeing how unruly and how crazy it is in my own mind. And that's, I think, probably one of the most helpful things you've pointed out to me is, don't be upset about that. That's actually a good thing. That's what's supposed to happen. Celebrate that and be really happy that you came to the present moment. So that instead of getting frustrated, it's a source of joy and success. So turning that around has been probably the most important, because that's what I really struggled with, because that really frustrates your or it saps your motivation, because it feels like you're wasting your time, and it feels really hard and stressful to be in that other place.
Right. But you can see that that's just budding wisdom. On the other side of that wisdom, we can actually see that's the process that students go through. That's the awakening. Because you begin to wake up to the fact that, oh, the misery that you're creating for yourself right now is the old habit that you've been using all along. That you're here at this retreat to see that stuff and to bring it to an end every time you catch it. Every time you catch it, you bring it back to this present moment. By doing so, those old habits will become weaker and weaker. And the habit of being successful will begin to increase. This is what we mean by Sita Bhavana. The word bhavana is the Pali word that's used for development. Bhante Gunaratana uses that word for the Bhavana Society that he has in West Virginia. All right, and it means development. So Sita Bhavana is to develop the mind. Sati Bhavana is to develop sati, etc., like that. So that's what we have to do, is we have to develop. But as we're developing, have you ever been involved with the sharpening of a knife?
Yes, that's actually a hobby of mine.
All right. So you know that there is a state when the knife is actually getting sharper, but the guy who is doing it is checking out where it still needs work, and to him it feels dull.
Yes.
But you hand that knife to some child or someone else, they're going to cut themselves with it. All right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is exactly what we're talking about. You're gaining a skill, and the skill that your development is because of the sharpening that you're doing, you're beginning to see dullness that was not available to be seen before.
Yeah.
It's a hobby of yours. How could I have guessed that? I don't know where the knife sharpening comes from.
I have one sitting on my desk.
So that was an excellent analogy for you. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. That's what we call synchronicity.
Yeah.
Not magic.
I would just call it coincidence, but that's really good because that really resonates with me, because I've actually had that experience of actually talking to my roommate and saying, man, this knife is really dull, and then he would use it and he would say, this is the sharpest knife I've ever had in my hand. And that actually happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So
you know exactly what we're talking about. That's that skill development. As the skill develops, we see more and more of what needs to be done without giving ourselves credit for the fact that we've already sharpened the knife down this far.
Yeah.
Not giving yourself credit for it. Okay, so this is the joy, is to recognize, wow, just a little more work now, just a little more work.
Yeah, it's a habit of being really hard on yourself.
Exactly. And society wants you to be hard on yourself so they don't have to.
Yeah.
But this is part of the slavery that we're in. You see, 300-400 years ago, they had to use real shackles and chains.
Oh, yeah.
Now they use a paycheck. Why? Because the people will be hard on themselves.
Yeah. I guess to bring it back to the retreat, what I'm worried about is I mean, this thing we were just talking about of finding the joy and having the winner's attitude instead of the loser's attitude. When I manage that, there's no sense of struggle or difficulty or worrying. But I sometimes, or I used to very often, find myself not being able to get to that place. So I would be stuck in those bad habits of being hard on myself, judging myself negatively, worrying, catastrophizing, seeing everything like having a very bleak outlook, being hopeless, all those sorts of things. And if you get really, what I'm worried about is that I might get stuck in that for an extended period of time on retreat without having anything to distract myself. And that seems so unpleasant to me that I'm really worried about that.
I know. Okay, so let's take a look at this. The worrying about it is the problem. That what happens in that retreat that you haven't had yet, you don't know what's going to happen.
That's true.
So you're projecting.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm worrying about what might happen, even
You're
though.
worried about what might happen. Exactly.
Yeah.
That is worry. That is, in fact, that restlessness that we just touched on a little bit. Okay. So recognize that that thought of worry about what's going to happen in the retreat is painful right now and has nothing to do with the retreat. It's what you're doing right now with the mind. It's worried. But you already know that you can see that worry as a worry and say, out you go. Worries are not allowed in this house. Out. That in fact, the story that I told you about the student full of anxiety, how he got into anxiety was because he was worried about the retreat. Little extra layers of it in there for him that you don't have and we don't have to get into. But the important point is that if you get worried about going into a retreat, when you go into that retreat, you'll make a mess of it.
Mm.
But if you walk into that retreat like, oh, I'm the winner here, I'm gonna out meditate even me. That I'm the best sitting dude in this class. And I'm going to enjoy the heck out of it. Then you go in as a winner.
Mm.
What, 10 days? I can handle 10 days. So it's really that change of attitude, and that the time to change that attitude is every time the worry comes up. Now, that can be about anything. And since I don't have much in my life, I'll have to use an example of things that I do have in my life. And that is once a year, I have to go for visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how much some people, because I have done it in the past, think about the visa. After we get this year's visa, we start thinking about next year's visa. And if it's in January that the visa is going to happen, we spend the entire month of November and December fretting over getting that visa. To where, in fact, the actual amount of paperwork that's needed for the visa can be done in several hours at most. And so we do that several hours of visa when we need to do that several hours of visa. And for the whole rest of the year, we don't think about visa at all. We can label visa as one of the animals to keep out of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because any thoughts about visa without doing anything about it is just suffering.
Yes.
And so you can see that that applies to almost anything. Renewing your insurance would be one of the things. You either do it or you don't do it, but don't spend any time thinking about it, because that's just suffering. So in your regard, if you're going to do a retreat, then when you're in the retreat, do the retreat. Don't do the retreat full of worry about the retreat in advance. So when you think about the retreat and start worrying about it, the thing to do is say, "Ah, catch you! I see you worrying about a retreat already."
So in that sense, being worried about it is actually a hindrance. Like.
That's exactly the right label to put on it.
So.
In fact, so does the Buddha.
Yeah.
Specifically using the word worry. That's why on the footnote of every email, you'll see the word, don't worry, be happy. That's a quote from the Buddha. You have to go through several sutras to find it.
So, but there's a very real sense in which people do have really bad experiences going to retreats, right? So, I mean,
they work themselves into it. That's what I'm
yeah.
saying. Yes, people do have bad experiences. Why? Because they don't have the tools or the skills that you're developing.
Okay. So would it be wise then to strategically say, I'm going to work up to a certain certain baseline level before I ever do a retreat, so that I'm in a better position to not work myself up into some kind of negative mind state. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Exactly. Now the question is, how long is that going to take? A month?
Yes.
A
Yeah.
week?
Yeah.
A day?
I don't know. That I've had that thought as well, of, in the sense that if you have a lot of experience, like for example dealing with restlessness or an itching face or knee pain while sitting, then when you come to the retreat and all those things are kind of magnified because you're not distracted, um, you can deal with it more easily without getting overwhelmed. That's what I was thinking.
Exactly so. And that's the right attitude.
The question is, am I there yet, or like how long
Yes, you
will it
are,
take me?
because all it takes is an attitude change. That's the
Huh.
only thing that needs to be changed is your attitude. The attitude, I can do this, as opposed to the attitude, I'll probably worry myself to death.
Okay.
It's an attitude change. That's the attitude. That's why the Eightfold Noble Path that the Buddha set up is so profound. It's so important to recognize, hey, that's part of the path. The path is you've got to have the right attitude about stuff. And so that I could go so far as to say is the number one reason why so many Westerners fail retreats, by their own definition, by their own decisions, that they fail the retreat. And one of the ways of defining that you're failing the retreat is by leaving early. But that's not the only way. Not doing another retreat is a sign of failure. The reason the students are failing in the retreats is because of attitude.
Okay. Yeah, that actually makes sense. And actually, it's the same. This, like, I've asked this question in a different form a number of times, and basically
Mm-hmm.
your answer has always been the same. So the stressing the, and I don't mean that in a disparaging or a negative way. I mean that in the sense that it makes sense. Like, the fundamental thing is attitude, to not get sucked into the loser's attitude, and to stay in the winner's attitude. So it just makes sense that that applies to retreats as well as it does to sitting practice, to everyday practice, to yeah, makes
Excellent.
sense.
Excellent.
Yeah, I have to say, I it's I can see why your answer makes sense, but it's just not fully convincing me somehow. And there's like there's still a lot of maybe I need to prepare myself more in terms of you know, preparing for the things that might happen, and I realize that's in the future and worrying and all that stuff. But in terms of maybe giving it more time or waiting until I'm more advanced in just everyday sitting practice. But I guess that's
But
just
the
more
more,
vegan.
let's look at it that way though. What do you mean by more advanced sitting practice?
Well,
If you if you are sitting and doing a sitting practice that is worried about whether or not you're ready to do a retreat or not, then that's not good practice. That's not practicing at all. That's just doing what you always do, which is worrying. But if
yeah.
your sitting practice is now a sitting practice which says, aha, I caught that one. Aha, I can see that too.
Mm.
I can change my mind. I can clean out the mind. I can do
Oh,
this retreat.
yeah. Now I
And if you
see.
start
Okay.
practicing it,
Yeah.
so that's what you need to do when you're in sitting meditation, is to keep the mind out of the worry.
Yeah.
and start thinking about being successful at a retreat.
Yeah. Okay. So just
think about it.
yeah,
Literally, I mean, start thinking
yeah,
about this, that it's your attitude. And if you
yeah,
have the winner's attitude, every moment that you have the winner's attitude, you'll be a winner. And every time you don't have the winner's attitude, you will naturally revert back to the victim, the loser, the depressed
yeah,
mentality, which everybody goes into the retreats with. But if you're on guard for that, be on guard for it as you're practicing getting ready to go to the retreat.
mm,
So
okay,
that when you're in the retreat, you can do what you're actually practicing now, which is the winner. I can do this. I can do
yeah,
this.
okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. Good. So just one practical question, would like in terms of length of retreat, because I've heard different opinions on this, where people say it's not it's not the best idea to do really short retreats, like maybe a weekend, 3 days, something like that, because uh, you spend basically the first 2 days really getting settled into it, and by that time the short retreat is already over, and you just get into it and then you leave again. So a lot of people recommend doing a 7 day, 10 day retreat, maybe even for your first retreat. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I agree with everything that you said, except for one thing. And that is that those 2 day retreats are a kind of settling in. In fact, that's exactly what I said before about how the retreats work.
Mm-hmm.
That they're in the beginning of the retreat, they're trying to settle in and get going,
Oh,
and in the middle
okay.
of the retreat, they're all miserable, and at the end of the retreat, they're all practicing how to get out of here. All right, so that's very characteristic. But that does not mean that there is no value in those 2 day retreats. In fact, the more skilled one is, the more valuable those 2 day retreats will be.
Mm. Okay.
All right. But the more traditional way is the 10-day retreats, and that was coming from Burma. But the 7-day retreats are practical. Some of the other retreats we do here are 7-day retreats merely to fill out the calendar.
Mm.
So that we literally have both Thai and English retreats going on all month long, spread across 3 meditation retreat centers. So that about 2/3 of the time, the retreat centers are running one kind of retreat or another. And so,
Yeah.
in order to not interfere with each other, it's a basic just timing issue over the calendar month. Uh, but there are kinds of things that happen. That's why uh, more advanced students will want to take a longer retreat that a beginner should not do. In other words, I do not recommend a 21-day retreat. That about the limit would be a 10-day retreat, because then you have a beginning, a middle, and an end that you can keep track of while you're in the retreat. If it's a 21-day retreat, the middle of it gets to be really, really long. And that the beginners don't have the mental fortitude. There's another thing about this. You can think of the mind as a muscle,
Mm-hmm.
possibly the most important muscle that a human has. And yet we leave it, the frontal cortex part of that muscle, undeveloped. And we have all of the work done by the automatic. Okay, that's exactly what happens within a PC. As a human using a PC, very little of the work is done by the human, and almost all of the work is done by the PC, including getting the data off of the disk and running it down to a cable and putting it into memory and then processing, the whole 9 yards. Okay, exactly the same thing is true with an airliner with an automatic pilot. All right, so long as the aircraft is flying on automatic pilot, then it's easy to do, but it's dangerous.
Mm.
Why? Because you can have thunderclouds, you can have a mountain in front of you, you can have all kinds of things that are not part of the program that automatic pilot has. Okay, um, and so, but when you take the plane off of automatic pilot, now there's a lot of work to do. The pilot really has to fly this airplane. He
Mm-hmm.
really has to take care of power and pitch and yaw and attitude and all kinds of work that he has to do. And the easy thing to do is put it back on automatic pilot. Unfortunately, in our own lives, we live exactly that same way. And most people will live their whole lives on automatic pilot, going from one thunderstorm to another, not realizing that they could avoid all of that bad weather if they would just simply watch where they're going and pay attention to it and keep track of. But the process of learning how to do that is actually the process of learning how to fly this aircraft without using automatic pilot.
Mm-hmm.
To put it on manual. So so that's one in a way that's one's right effort. One's right effort is to take it off of automatic pilot and putting it on to manual, so that we've actually got to 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 do the thing. We got to breathe. If we're watching our breath, we actually have to watch and take the breath that we want to take and hold it or shorten it or lengthen it or make it big or whatever, completely our choice. But if we forget about the breath, then it will go back to its automatic. And
Mm-hmm.
we're lucky that way. But while we are consciously working with the breath, we've actually got to do it.
Yeah.
Now that we're going to do that with the breath, we're going to also wake that up to the whole body, that we're not going to let the body be on automatic pilot. We're going to actually have to manually control the body with the conscious part of the mind, because the only option is to let it go back on automatic pilot, which is the way that it normally is. So that means that really we don't have to be off of automatic pilot on to manual 100% of the time, but we need to be there on manual at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now the next one, then, if we can learn to do that with the body, then we can learn to do that with feelings, because the feelings are the ones that really need to be managed. Because the automatic pilot for feelings is almost always going to run us into a thunderstorm.
Mm-hmm.
That's its job, in fact. The job is of the reptilian part of the brain is to keep us safe, which means it's got to be on guard for danger, which means it sees danger, 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 when in fact there's no danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to come out of that danger resisting automatic pilot mode. That in fact the automatic pilot uh, winds us flying all kinds of zigzags around, trying to avoid imaginary targets that are part of the program. But if we're on manual, it takes work to be on manual, but we can see clearly what's going on. And so we wind up with a much smoother ride. I think that my analogies of automatic pilot and aircraft are beginning wearing thin here, but it's got its value up to the point to recognize that when we're on manual, it's number one, it's safer, but
Mm-hmm.
number two, in the beginning at least, it's a lot more work.
Mm-hmm. So that's why you don't recommend super long retreats for beginners, because that work gets to be too much.
Yeah, then the work is too much. It's almost like going to a gym.
Mm-hmm.
That if you don't do enough exercise, then it doesn't matter whether you go to the gym or not, because you're not getting any benefit out of it. If you go and work too hard, then you're going to be sore the next day, and then you don't even want to go to the gym anymore. It's too painful.
Mm.
But there is a sweet spot,
Yes.
and that
Okay.
sweet spot's what we're looking for. That sweet spot in sitting meditation, how long do you sit? The answer is when the mind gets tired, and then we put a little bit more time on it, but we don't want to sit a long time with the mind really tired, because we're not getting any benefit out of it. I'm just making the mind more tired. But we do want to keep it in meditation long enough to get it tired, so that we recognize, oh, the mind is getting tired now. And so we begin to do it that way. There's a sweet spot, And we also recognize that that sweet spot's going to be in everything we do. We either don't do it enough, we do it correctly amount, or we overdo it, including retreats or sitting practice or anything else. Going to the gym, working out. Marathon runners, they have to find a sweet spot or they won't finish the race. So I would recommend 7 to 10 days. Have you done any research about what's available to you?
Yeah, I've actually been doing a lot of research. So I know that there's many retreat centers in Germany. However, not many that I particularly liked, because many are more in the new agey wellness type. Really, really expensive retreat. Like, it's not so much a retreat as like retreat slash yoga, tai chi, spa type deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do.
There's a lot of BS going around in these retreats.
There's money to be made.
Yeah, and I'm very wary of retreats that are like 800 or the equivalent of like close to $1,000 for a week. They're insanely expensive. And also, I don't really have that kind of money to just spend on a week-long retreat. So I've found some stuff. There's Goenka retreats they have here, but they're basically always full. There's always a waiting list, because
okay. This is what I would recommend: is start getting on those waiting lists.
yeah. There's another one that was recommended to me by someone on Reddit, but they do 15-day retreats for beginners, so that might be too long. But they do like Mahasi style noting technique, and apparently the teacher there is very good. And also they just do it on a donation basis, which feels much more.
That feels good, yes.
Yeah.
The Goenkas are normally on a donation basis also. So
Yeah.
that looks like that your two best shots
Yeah.
would be that one, the Mahasi, that's 15 days, or the Goenka, which is 10 or
Yeah.
11 days.
Yeah.
They will also be very similar in what they're doing.
Yeah, I
And since
kind of
I'm very
already.
familiar with that stuff.
Yeah, I've already been signed up to a Goenka retreat, but I couldn't go because of time scheduling issues. So I tried to get familiar with how Goenka retreats work in terms of noting or being aware of the breath, and then the body scanning and all those things. So, yeah, it's just tough to find something that works time-wise in terms of like vacation days, and that's not crazy expensive, and where I have some trust that there's a good teacher who knows what they're doing and can actually help me with if problems come up. So I've not found anything yet that I'm 100% happy with. So
You won't.
yeah,
Make a list.
yeah,
Rearrange the list according to whatever priorities you put, and go ahead and choose one. Or you may, in fact, if there's a problem with because of the popularity of the, let them choose you
how does
by
that work?
signing up. Just sign up for everything, and then if you
Okay.
can do it,
Yeah,
then you do it. And if you can't, then you say, sorry, please leave my place for someone else. If they're that full, then they won't have a problem with it.
yeah, yeah. Something I was considering was maybe doing a shorter retreat first, to kind of get my toes wet, so to speak.
I wouldn't expect you to do that if they were expensive toe weddings.
Yeah, yeah,
The Dhamma is to be given free. It's not to be charged for.
So you would recommend to be skeptical of places that charge a lot of fees?
Yes, and the skepticism increases with the fee.
Yeah, I realize that they have to pay rent as well, and they have costs. So I don't expect to go there for free. I just have a retreat for a week and pay nothing. That's not what I expect, but it
We
makes
can
me
do that
uneasy.
here in Thailand. All
Yeah,
you need
just
to do, and in fact, if we're looking at expense, perhaps the price of a plane ticket can be factored into that.
okay.
I don't
That
know what your schedule is. Let's talk about this next time because it's getting a little long
yeah.
winded. This particular talk.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and finish this one, and we'll talk about retreats and things like that as a whole topic.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Let's do that.
So we'll see you later.
Thanks for your time.
Uh huh.